Okay. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Live with David Lewis. I am your host, David Lewis, and today we've got a great show. We're going to start a three-part series on objections. We all struggle with them. We all hate the fear of rejection. We all get them. But I got to be honest with you, some of the things that I think we've been taught over the years just does not work. I don't think it worked 20, 30, 40 years ago when we developed it, and I sure as heck don't think that it works today. I don't think we have thought out this process well enough. And I think most of us just wing it. And what we do is we dig ourselves so deep into a hole that we just can't get out of it. Now, obviously, with our inventory situation the way it is right now, we don't get a lot of objections because we can simply say to the customer, either you want it or you don't want it. This is the price. Sure, maybe we'll take $100 off, but it is what it is. But we're slowly starting to come out of this. I'm talking to dealerships that are starting to get inventory, and they are saying that they're getting back to the point where people are, have choices. And once they have choices, we're going to get more objections. So what is an objection? Well, an objection is an excuse not to buy. An excuse not to buy today, tomorrow. It's a defensive mechanism that the customer throws up. Now, we also talk a lot about obstacles. What is an obstacle? See, an obstacle is different than an objection. An obstacle is something that occurs during the sales process, where an objection is something that occurs after you ask the customer to buy the car. So an obstacle would be, is it okay if we walk around by ourselves? I don't want to drive the car. An objection would be the payment's too high. You're not giving enough for my trade. And these are two totally different things. An obstacle you deal with differently than you would an objection. Obstacles are more of speed bumps, and objections are roadblocks. We can overcome a speed bump, but if we're not good, we're not going to overcome a roadblock. To be a professional salesperson, you have to understand and know how to handle objections at the highest level if you really want to succeed. So let's talk about some old methods for overcoming objections. And the oldest one that I think is still being taught is the repeat, isolate, if I could, would you, and then try to overcome the objection. And that is just, it makes no logical sense to me. It's a formula to drop the price. You're giving the customer all the ammunition to want to have a lower price. So let's think about this. Customer says to you, the payment's too high. Why would you want to repeat that and reinforce it in their mind? You're creating now a cement objection, which is something that you can't break away at. So when the customer says, the payment's too high, a lot of them say they want you to repeat the objection. Well, what makes you think the payment's too high? Or what you're saying is that the payment's too high. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And then they want you to isolate the objection. Well, how do you isolate that objection? The payment's too high. How do you isolate it? Well, is it the cash price, the payment prices? And you're giving people other options for other objections to build on that objection. And again, that just doesn't make sense. And then the old, if I could, would you, is just a great formula for lowering the price. We're not overcoming anything. All we're doing is dropping the price. If I could, would you? Well, your payment on the vehicle is $400 a month. Well, the payment's too high. Okay. And we repeat it. And then we isolate it. Then we say, well, if I could do it for $390, would you? If I could do it for $380, would you? If I could do it for $370, would you? This just does not make logical sense to me. This is an attempt to lower the price, and we don't want the price to come down. This just isn't right. And then the last part is then they tell us to overcome the objection. Well, how do you overcome the objection? So you repeat it, you isolate it. If I could, would you? Now you want to overcome it. Why didn't you just overcome it to begin with? When people object, you have to give them something to have second thoughts, to question why they said that. That's very important. Make people think. Ironically, most salespeople have trouble dealing with silence, whether it's silence on their part or silence on the customer's part. When a customer is silent, that's a good sign. It means they're thinking, and you want them to think. When a customer says, you're not giving enough for my trade, and then there's silence, it means they're thinking. You've got to give them a reason to change their mind. Now, let's also understand that when they object, they're expecting us, the salesperson, to attack them. So they become very defensive. We've talked about this before. When a customer comes onto your lot, this is their defensive posture. They're very defensive. Our job as salespeople is to lower that defensive posture. That's why we have sales steps. the meet and greet, the qualification, the inventory, and so on. We step by step want to lower this defensive posture so that when they come time to get to the closing booth, we're at the lowest possible point. That is critical. You cannot sell somebody who is still this defensive. That's why I'm so adamantly opposed to trial closes. An interrogation in the investigation step where we're asking somebody 1,000 questions. It doesn't release these defensive postures. Now, if you've done a great job in your presentation and demonstration, you brought the customer came in like this, you've done a great job lowering their defensive postures. When they now sit down with you at their desk, this is automatically going to come up a little bit. It's not going to come back up to here, but however low you got it when they sat down, it's going to rise a little bit. Why? Because everybody knows what the next step is. They know that you're now going to ask them to buy the car. You've earned the right to ask them to buy the car. So we developed many years ago 4 different unique steps to overcoming the objection. And today we're only going to deal with one step of that process because it is the most critical step. And the 4 steps are as follows. The first step is to acknowledge the customer. The second step is to counter the objection. The third step is what we call a seek acknowledgement. And the fourth step is to close. This is all designed to have the customer have second thoughts, to come across as somebody that's different and unique in the sales process. So let's start with step number 1, which is the acknowledgement statement. When a customer objects, you have to let them know a few things. You have to let them know that you understood them. You have to know that what they said was logical and reasonable and that it made sense. If you automatically attack that customer's objection, well, we know what happens to this defensive posture. It goes right back up. So when we acknowledge the customer, we have to release them. The other thing that we want to do is we want to catch them off guard. Again, I heard you. I understood you. What you said is logical, and I want to catch you pleasantly off guard. So I'm going to give you now a response, and I'm going to break it down for you. So if a customer said to me, the payment is too high. So I've quoted my payment. I've got my worksheet out. Said, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, I've got great news. With $1,000 down, your monthly investment is $400 a month. And then, of course, I always ask those 7 most effective words closing a car deal. Would you like to buy the car? We've always got to ask those words. Those are the critical words. Would you like to buy the car? And now let's say the customer states, it sounds great, but that payment's a little too high for us. Now keep something in mind. That is a great objection. It means they want to buy. They're still sitting there. They've given you a good objection. Now how you handle it's important. So remember, they're defensive. Now you have to release them. So when the customer says that payment's too high, I would say, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I too set up a high budget to buy a high ticket item, I too set up a budget and I too try to stay within that budget. And that can be very difficult, can't it? That is my acknowledgement. I want that customer to know, I heard you. I understood you. What you said makes sense. And what I'm doing is I'm catching that customer off guard. They are not expecting me to do that. They are expecting me to attack them. That releases them. So I've written this out. So let me break this down. So the first thing I said to you was, I understand. I understand exactly where you're coming from. This is called a diffuser statement. I immediately want them to know, I get it. I understand. It's logical. The second part is when I said, when I buy a high ticket item, I too try to set up a budget, try to stay within it. And that what I'm trying to do is make sure that they understand that what they're saying is logical, that you're not the only one that's been in this situation. I'm in that situation too when I have to buy a car. The third thing I said was it's difficult. I mean, it is difficult. And what I'm trying to let them know is I'm showing them some empathy, that I want them to know that I understand their situation. There are 2 kinds of empathies. There's general empathy and personal empathy. Personal empathy requires the I word. When I buy a car, I understand. That's personal empathy. And personal empathy goes a long way with people. Now, the fourth part of this is I did what we call a tie-down phrase. See, I wanted them now to acknowledge what I just said to them. When you overcome an objection, you have to have a little bit of dialogue going back and forth. So again, they say the payment's too high. I say, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I set out to buy a high ticket item, I too set up a budget and I try to stay within that budget. And it can be difficult, can't it? Can't it was my tie down phrase. I wanted some sort of acknowledgement from people. Now, they might say, yes, it is. I'm glad you understand. They might nod their head or make some sort of body gesture, but you want them to know, you want them to reply, some sort of positive response that they're now on the same page with you. And what you're doing is you're setting up the expectations that this is not going to be confrontational. Folks, look, I don't want to be confrontational with you, and I don't want someone to be confrontational with me. I've always said to you this over and over again. Selling cars should be fun. It should be fun to sell them, and it should be fun to buy them. Unfortunately, we've made this process so complicated that it is not. If I'm not having fun, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do anything I don't have fun with, okay? That's just me personally. Life is too short to do something that I'm not enjoying. But I also believe this. I can bring the fun with me. I can make this fun. And to me, fun is not high pressure. Now, it doesn't matter what the objection is. I can give you a response and an acknowledgement to anything. So let's say the customer states to me, well, you're not giving me enough for my trade. I would say, gee, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I set out to buy a car, and I too have a trade, I never feel like I'm getting what that vehicle is worth. And it's frustrating, isn't it? Perfect acknowledgement. I don't care what they say. Well, I want to go home and talk to my significant other. I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. When I buy a high ticket item, I too want to get some advice from somebody else, especially a significant other. It's a logical thing to do, isn't it? Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, well, now you're giving them permission to go home and talk to the other person. No, because I still have more to go in my process. I'm just letting them know that I understand. This is not going to be confrontational. We're on the same page. This is not unique. When you overcome an objection, again, I said to you, you've got to give people a reason to change their minds. You can't change their minds if they stay too defensive. And I can relate to a husband and wife, a boyfriend and girlfriend. They get in an argument, and one of them knows they're wrong, and they don't want to give in. That then becomes confrontational, and you don't want that situation. It's very, very important. A couple other factors, because I got a lot of you are popping in questions real quick, so I'll go to your questions here in a few minutes. This is such a great way to start the objection process. It really, really, really is. And when I tell you it catches the customer off guard, you're going to be amazed at how some people are going to say, yes, I'm glad you agree with me. Okay. Again, I told you it sets up the counter step perfectly. Empathy is always the best way to diffuse chaos, no matter how you want to do it. When somebody is agitated, when somebody is defensive, when somebody is apprehensive, empathy allows them to relax. Okay. And the other thing is this. We don't want to sound like every other salesperson. When you use the same steps, the same processes that everybody else does, you get nowhere. Now, let me just give you a little lead into the next show. So in the next show, what we're going to talk about now is what we call the counter step. This is where I'm going to tell them a story or a scenario that's going to make them think, a scenario that makes logical sense to them so that they can digest it and then come to a different conclusion. In my opinion, when most people, there's three common objections we get. Price or payment's too high. You're not getting enough for my trade, and I want to go home and think about it. I can tell you right now, I want to go home and think about it tells you one thing and one thing only. Either you picked the wrong car, okay, or they don't like you. It's one of those two things. Now, I'm sure there could be a couple of other things it is, but those are the two main things. You're on the wrong car, or they don't like you. If they don't like you, I don't care what car you want. I don't care if they love it, even if they like the price. They're not buying that car for you. Now, there are other little objections that we get. I want to talk to my spouse, and he talks to my financial advisor, or I want to go look at other vehicles before I make a final decision. So, somebody says to you, well, look, you're the first place we've been to. We still want to go look at the Chevys and the Ford. I understand exactly where you're coming from. I'm just like you. Before I buy a high ticket item, I too would want to check everything out. And I want to make sure that I'm getting the best deal that I can. It's a logical way to buy a car, isn't it? Now, am I still going to overcome the objection? Sure, I am. But remember this, if I don't win the sale, I want them to come back to me. Because if they don't come back to me, if I didn't inspire them enough, they're never going to come back. And a lot of times we think that we've got to close the deal right now. And I do want to close the deal right now. So don't ever misunderstand me. I want to close the deal now, and I want to make as much gross as humanly possible. But in some situations, you have to let the customer leave. And if you let them leave with any type of bad or sour taste in their mouth, they are not coming back to you. That's important. So next month, on the next show, we're going to talk about the counter step. All right, let me jump into some of your questions here that are popping up. Matt wants to know, are we not putting ourselves at a disadvantage by agreeing to their objection? No, Matt, you're not. Because if you don't agree with them, you're going to make them more defensive. If you attack, they're going to defend. It's sort of like when people lie to you. What happens when you lie? Well, you defend that lie. It doesn't matter. You defend the lie. All right, what is this? Chrysler guy wants to know, if I ask them if there are any other reasons stopping them from buying the car, isn't that a good way to get all the objections out front at one time? I don't think so. I don't think there's more than one objection to begin with. If somebody gives you an objection after objection after objection, they don't want to buy the car. And then again, it goes back to, why don't they want to buy the car? Price? Probably you got them on the wrong car, or they don't like you. And folks, I'm going to beat this up with you. My bet is they didn't like you. Now, you might be a great individual, great person. Maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you pressured them. Maybe you pushed them through the process. Maybe you went too fast for them. Maybe you didn't take your time and were caring and understanding. Maybe you weren't listening to them and they didn't like you. All right, Steele, that's a good name. I asked the customer what payment they're looking to be at prior to getting the numbers from my manager. Is this not a good strategy in your opinion? No. Look at folks, you always know I'll tell you the way I think. I'm not telling you that I'm right. It's my opinion. I would never want to know what payment they're looking to be at prior to getting the numbers. I don't understand the benefit in that. I know what you're hoping. You're hoping that they say 500 and the manager says it's only 460. And then you can go back and say, great news, I got you at 490 and you make more money. It never, ever, ever happens like that. So I don't understand it. I always want to give my number first. I'm in control. This is my game, my bat, my ball. I'm controlling the process. Is it a hardcore control? No. Is it an aggressive control? No. We're going to start at my numbers. I'm going to present the numbers and I'm going to ask you those 7 words. Would you like to buy the car? And then I'm going to wait for the response. And listen to this. I've shared this with you before. The better the presentation, the better the objection. The better the objection, the easier it is to overcome. I have taught you over and over again, the 7 most effective words to closing a car deal. Would you like to buy the car? And I hear all the time from salespeople that use that all the time, that some people do just say yes. It's not a lot, but if it's 2-3%, I want my 2-3%. So let's agree that 97% of the people are going to object. I want it to be an objection that I feel good about, that I can overcome. That's important to me. I've learned the better my presentation, the better my objection. The better the objection, the easier it is to overcome. All right, a couple more and then we'll wrap up here. Marion wants to know, with the inventory shortage we're experiencing at the moment, do we even need a process when we get a price objection? Should we just say take it or leave it, essentially? Well, sure. I mean, you can and you do and you will. Obviously, you want to say it in the most kindest and sincerest of words. You don't want to say to somebody, hey, look, unfortunately, it's a take it or leave it. If you don't buy it, someone will buy it 2 hours later. That's not the way to create a relationship and something moving forward. I still believe that most people want to negotiate. I still believe in my heart and soul that 90% of our car deals are being negotiated. I believe they're being started at a higher number to begin with. I think we've learned how to hold gross. I'm afraid that if we don't get good at this, we're going to lose all this gross once the inventory starts flocking in. I do believe that. Once you have a manufacturer that has inventory and the inventory is at all the other dealerships, I think we need to learn this and understand how to do it. So under this situation, yes, you can very politely say to somebody, listen, unfortunately, we are not discounting this particular vehicle at this time. It is a popular vehicle. We do feel we will sell it in the next day or two. But I understand if the, price wise, you don't feel comfortable with this, can we look at something different and see where it goes from there? If somebody wants something bad enough, they're going to pay for it. All right, let me do one more. David wants to know, can you re-explain the tie-down phrases again? Okay, so David, tie-down phrases are designed to get the customer to respond and react. It's to let me as the salesperson know that they're engaged in the conversation. It allows me to know that they're following my process. So a tie down phrase is something that gets some sort of either verbal or physical response from the customer. So it's a lot of words like isn't it, shouldn't it, doesn't it, wouldn't it. Customer says, well, you're the first place we've been to. I want to go look at this and this. I fully understand. I too, if I were looking for a car, I'd want to shop around, make sure I got the car that I really enjoyed the most at the price that was affordable in my budget. And sometimes that can be very difficult. Isn't it? And they're going to hopefully say, yes, it is. I'm glad you understand. And everybody's going to respond differently. Just trying to think off the top of my head of another objection. We've done the trade one. No matter what it may be, I'm not buying a car for 2 weeks. I understand exactly where you're coming from. You say you always want to take your time. I like to take my time when I'm in the shopping process. It's a logical way to buy a car, isn't it? Those are tie-down phrases. And those tie-down phrases get you that commitment that you want, that they are in the process with you. So let's wrap up. Unfortunately, holidays are coming up, so we were not going to have another show until I believe the first week of January. I will recap on that show what we talked about here, because we are going to go into the second step, and the second step is going to be the counter step. And then the week after that, we'll wrap it up and talk about the seek, acknowledgement, and the close, and it'll all come together for you. And the most important thing is to practice, 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 practice. Take a few minutes, write out some acknowledgement statements that you feel comfortable with. Practice, practice, practice. You can still use your acknowledgement statement with your old style way of whatever you've learned for how to negotiate and overcome objections. You will notice it will just release the customer's defenses a little bit better. So with that said, I want to wish you all the best. I hope you all have a very happy and healthy holiday. I wish you all the best in 2022. We made it almost through 2021, and it wasn't as bad as we all thought it was. As a matter of fact, for most of us, it was a fantastic year, and I expect 2022 to be the same. So everyone, please be safe, and I will see you again next year. Goodbye, everyone.